Today. We're going to start with item 3. We're going to take item 1 and 2, and we're going to punt those to the end of the meeting today. And so we're going to start with item 3, and this is the minutes of the November 21st, 2024 meeting. And these are the minutes. We have a motion to approve the minutes.
We just talk.
Yeah,
they're up there. Perfect.
Yeah.
I move that the board approve the minutes of the November 21st, 2024 meeting of the Texas PSF Corporation Board as provided.
Motion in a second. Any objections? Any corrections or additions to the minutes? If not, we'll stand the please as read. And take care of item 3. On to item 4. And item 4 is the report of our Chief Executive Officer regarding matters related to the management of the Texas Public School Fund Corporation. Mr. Porter.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you all for being here today. And had a variety of comments to share with you. As Chairman Maynard mentioned, we moved in at the beginning of this month to the building. I will point out that this was a fantastic build out project. It was ahead of time, under budget, no accidents on scene, and both the architectural firm and developmental firm did an outstanding job of keeping things on schedule and doing it to a high level of quality. So the staff, I think, is very re-energized to be here instead of having, to share chairs and be crammed all together in what looked like a maze for a mouse looking for a piece of cheese. We now have an open area architecture. And it's a wonderful space.
Jody, next slide.
So we were kind of taking our vision and value statement really seriously as we move into this new year. We start most all of our big internal meetings reminding ourselves why we're here. We know our mission is to provide stable and growing funding for the available school fund, and the secondary charge of the legislature is to be a guarantor of bonds for school districts so they can issue debt at a AAA rating. But the way we want to do it, our vision statement, is that we want to be a magnet for exceptional talent. We want to be a leader in endowment management, a partner with Texas universities, corporations, and industries. And of course, all leading to a perpetually increasing source of funding for the education of public education in the state of Texas. We have in every office, every cubicle, and every meeting room, our values stated to remind everybody each day of conduct that we expect of our team. This is part of imparting a new culture in this organization, a culture that strives for excellence. And those values are stewardship, the fact that this is monies for the benefit of K through 12 school children, and every one of our actions should be centered around what is the best proper way to discharge that duty of being a fiduciary, with integrity in the way we conduct our business dealings, competence in the way we deliver our analysis and due diligence, the effort that each and every member of the team needs to bring forth towards this mission and towards their workday every day. And obviously, we're bottom line oriented. The results matter. The fact that at the end of this year, we were able to kind of put our money where our mouth is and be able to recommend to the Board of Education increasing the distribution to the available school fund by $500 million to a record high $4.8 billion. And that's the bottom line of all the effort this team's doing every day, day in and day out. The leadership this board is providing. At the end of the day, are we providing the funding for our school children? And last but certainly not least, I'd say this should be all 6 of the values. that we conduct ourselves in a very collaborative and collegial and professional manner in how we deal with each other. So this is kind of our Pledge of Allegiance. In conjunction with moving into the new building and the fact that we were a corporation, we spent a lot of effort on rebranding ourselves. I challenged the staff when we moved into this new building that we were not going to bring bad habits, bad people, bad processes, piles and piles of paper files and the like. And we kind of treated this as a baptism of sorts. And part and parcel of that is, rebranding this enterprise for the next 200 years. The fact that we're a corporation is something that we want to kind of lead with. We've spent an exhaustive time coming up with a new seal and brand, and I have to thank Chairman Brad Wright, who referred to us a group, a woman-owned group out of Central Texas that helped develop this branding. Our master seal is something that has a lot of meaning to us. The key being representative of knowledge, our leaf clusters being representative of growth. We want to play up to the fact that we have been here since 1845, and we think that's a pretty powerful statement when we put ourselves out in the public view. This brand was designed to be deconstructed for a variety of uses in presentations and watermarks and other things. And as we kind of deconstruct the brand, next slide, we have this without the seal that's just kind of focused on that knowledge and growth. But at its core, our brand is a brand. And we've kind of had this moment of clarity that, to really translate being around since 1845 in the early days of the Texas frontier, and what's a more appropriate brand than a brand itself. And so this conglomeration is kind of a monogram of the Permanent School Fund in Texas is our most elemental brand, and you'll see it's building and a lot of paperwork that's generated for it. So now all of our presentations, our websites, the logos in the building, everything is centered around this new brand. So pretty pleased with that. And I think some of y'all see we gave you a sample of some items here that reflecting that branding. Okay, I want to talk about performance. This is going to be something we want to make sure that every meeting we touch on. I will, at the end of these comments, talk about our calendar for the next 2 years and some of the items that we want to have as regular reoccurring agenda items for the board to consistently communicate things. And performance will be at the top of that list. Performance for last year, this is for 2024, trailing figures as of December 31st. Our total fund returned 7.92% net of all fees and costs. Our newly constructed benchmark return was 7.91. So we were almost identical to the benchmark. And that is an outstanding result. It's counterintuitive, but recall, we moved $28 billion of this $56 billion fund. The amount of money in motion last year is staggering. I can't think of any times where another large endowment would move that much assets in that short a period of time, unless they had some massive inflow of gifting. But for us to do that, that means there's a lot of money moving back and forth, and it's in cash, and it's in one asset class, and then in another asset class, and it presents the opportunity to have a whole lot of tracking error and really get off the mark. And the fact that we were able to do this and come right on top of our benchmark is nothing short of a minor miracle, given the magnitude of what we did. The 3-year return is worth focusing on. That's what we're anchoring our incentive comp plans on, and the return there is we're just over 1% over our benchmark annualized in 3 years. Most of that outperformance is coming from our real assets book, both real estate, natural resources infrastructure and our absolute return, AKA hedge fund strategy together. So we're pleased with that. The challenge will be, how do we maintain as we now are selecting a lot of new managers and strategies as we move this money around, and we're hoping to, our long-term target is we expect to be at least 0.5% above our benchmark return. Our stretch target is up to 1.5%. And then, every now and again, we might be fortunate enough to be in excess of that. But in my opinion, if the program is working well, we should expect somewhere around 0.5% net of all fees and costs as excess return. And that's a significant amount of money there. Now, as we move forward in our allocation plan, and we are doing the implementation side of the goal, which I'll talk about in a second, we're hoping to be in a posture that not only are we able to continue to distribute to the ASF this additional $500 million per biennium, but that we're able to extract in the order of an additional $500 million to $1 billion to possibly north of $1 billion. We think it's achievable. We have a lot of infrastructure work to do over the next 2 or 3 years to get there, but it's my desire that in 3 to 5 years from now, we are consistently generating, in excess of about $1 billion of returns over our benchmarks to help fund education. The peer group ranking that we are comparing ourselves to other large endowment funds. This particular one is our custodial peer group for large endowments greater than $1 billion out of the Bank of New York universe. And you see, we have been, kind of wallowing in the basement there, the bottom decile of our peers, 0 being worst, 100 being best. And we have now, as we've changed this asset allocation to start migrating towards our peers, we're seeing progress. This is probably looks even better than it otherwise would, because there's a lot of tailwinds, as I said, from this excess returns that we're generating from the portfolio is also helping. So part of that is asset allocation change, and part of that is success in the implementation within asset classes. But nonetheless, it's a trend we hope to maintain. My long-term goal for our organization here is that we are somewhere between median and third quartile. To consistently be in the top 10%, you end up having to take significant asset allocation bets versus your peers, and that can result in you racing back down to the bottom sometimes with volatility. So if you can have an asset allocation that is closely in line with your peers, the asset allocation should be able to get you to about median. And if you are generating excess returns, that should get you right at the edge of top quartile. I think that's the land we would like to be operating within, and I would call that a very successful turnaround for this fund if we can consistently do that. I want to talk about, before I get into plan updates, just legislative updates. The budget that the board approved last year, we had spent a lot of time, and I have to thank Chairman Maynard and Chairman Wright, who accompanied me to countless meetings up at the Capitol to walk through our budget and our rationalization and how the budget is linked to our strategic plan and is truly a bottoms-up budget. We felt we had some pretty good support. We found out about 3 weeks ago, though, that we were going to have to, it's not technically a zero-based budget, but we were going to have to go ahead and rationalize all of the increases that we were asking for. And to that end, Chairman Maynard and I presented to the Senate Finance Committee Monday last our plan, and really what we're asking for, our value proposition is, we think there's another $500 million to $1 billion plus of consistent excess returns, and for that we're asking the legislature to give us $17 million in additional funding and 24 positions over the next 2.5 years. So it's obviously, in my mind, a very good value proposition for the legislature. Chairman Maynard and I held meetings along with other staff members with 5 members of the Senate Finance Committee in the last 2 weeks to a person. They have been supportive of our mission and pleased with our progress so far. And this coming Monday, I will be presenting the same to the House Appropriations Committee. Couple of other items you should just be aware of. The legislative staff suggested 3 riders. They have suggested a rider on reporting requirement for our incentive comp plan. This is consistent with what they've asked of other pension plans in the state. So it's pretty straightforward request. Interestingly, we had asked for a rider to allow this corporate board and its compensation committee to set all compensation. Historically, the compensation levels for the CIO and CEO were kind of above the line and captured in a rider. That rider was modified by the legislative staff to remove the CIO position, but the CEO position remains there. Lastly, a rider that removes transfers the reporting requirement from the TEA to this corporate board for when the 5A and 5G distributions have been approved and finalized. We have an obligation 45 days before final approval to telegraph that to the legislature. And that will now be the duty of the corporation and not the TEA. All right, some highlights of the strategic plan progress. This is the very highest level yesterday, and I think Chairman Kinsey will report, the work we did in his committee yesterday in getting very granular on the strategic plan. But these are just the view from 100,000 feet. The asset allocation, as I said, we took a good step towards our peers once we demystified and quantified the effective asset allocation changes on our implied credit rating as it pertains to the BGP program. And what we found from that exercise last year is that we had significant leeway to allocate our assets more consistently with large endowment funds. But there was a big gap from where we were and where our peers were. And most of it is all centered around private markets, private equity, private credit, real estate, real assets. And those assets take time to identify strategies, contract for the strategies that have capital drawn down to where you have invested assets in that space. Because of the time that takes, we took basically a half step towards our peers. We're making progress here. I think at some point, probably later this year, when we revisit asset allocation, we're seeing that if we get ahead of our schedule on closing that gap, at some point, we'll come back to the board and ask for, a further step towards our peers. We're not there now, but we're making good progress. As the private equity program is growing, we're using a single benchmark for a program that has at least 3 separate and distinct asset classes within it, that being venture capital, expansion capital, and buyouts. Those have distinct benchmarks associated with them. And much like we bifurcated private credit into investment grade and non-investment grade, and we had 2 associated benchmarks for those 2 asset classes, we will come back to the board and recommend that we break out this ever-growing private equity place into likely these 3 categories and benchmark them a little more appropriately. The other thing that we've been working on very hard is modeling the total risk exposure of the overall portfolio. We have approximately $57 billion of assets that are under the direct oversight and control of this corporate board, but there's another $4 to $5 billion that are under the oversight and management of the General Land Office, but they're for the benefit of the available school fund and school children. So both of those pools of money represent the total corpus, if you will, for our mission. And we think it's important to model risk and exposure looking at all of those assets, because we have significant more exposure to particularly oil and gas through the very large royalty book managed by the GLO. And we should be cognizant of that as we're allocating the other 57 million that we're not, unintentionally concentrating things. So more to come on this, but we've got a lot of data that's helping us look at this in a much more holistic fashion. The good news is this, we discussed this in investment committee yesterday. Matter of fact, a couple of members were able to join and see that meeting, that we are positioned very well for an inflationary environment. And one of the top line themes that you hear day in and day out when you look at the news or financial news networks and is that underneath this economy, which generally looks sound, we obviously have some volatility as there's a lot of policy work being done in DC that kind of makes markets move around a lot more. Generally, there seems to be a decent support for the overall economy in the U.S., but inflation is a factor. We're seeing it day in, day out, all kinds of goods and services. And the chances of inflation going up are much higher than inflation going down right now. And our portfolio is well positioned for that environment. The goal 2 in our strategic plan is once we've set an asset allocation, the mix of asset classes we want to be in, the real work is in how do you implement within those asset classes. We are evolving from an enterprise that has been really good at picking funds, but there's economic advantage and higher returns available to us if we augment those funds with co-investments by our sponsors that are have an investment that's larger than they can accommodate in the fund, and they're willing to offer it to certain LPs at better economics, sometimes at no fee and no carry. And that falls right to our bottom line. So, it's actually an infinite Sharpe ratio, right, if you will, because if you can increase your rate of return without changing the risk whatsoever, those trades are the best you can ever do. And there's opportunities to squeeze some of that out of these private market programs. The trick to that, though, is it takes a lot more underwriting and a lot more due diligence because these are, more concentrated and specialized bets. And one of our key build out areas is to staff and have processes for a co-investment direct and special situations team. We discussed this again in Chairman McKenzie's committee meeting yesterday. This effectively becomes almost a subcommittee of the broader investment committee, more specialized due diligence, higher level of due diligence, but ultimately those decisions and ideas flow back into the central investment committee and are controlled in that fashion. Other area that we need to continue to build out, we were able to staff our first foray into private credit, and recall we reallocated assets from private equity, from real estate, and from hedge funds that were indeed actually private credit investments. And we took a couple of team members to staff this private credit area. This has been a very successful part of our portfolio early on, very attractive risk-adjusted returns. We've got a lot more opportunities there. We need to add some human resources to that process as well. Those are probably the two areas where we've got the most build out to do over the next couple of years. Also, and our President, Deputy Chief Investment Officer, Stu Bohart, is going to talk about public equity here in the next presentation, so I won't get in a lot of detail here. But that's one of the last parts of the portfolio that we hadn't fully rationalized and have the long-term structure yet. And so we're going to talk about the progress there and what our thinking is. Last big piece of the implementation program that's going to be very valuable is we are implementing an overlay program, and that is to help us with rebalancing and tactical shifts. When you come up with a portfolio mix, and let's just take the simple 60-40 stock bond mix, and you put $6 and $4 in those respective asset classes, what happens is the next day you're no longer at 60-40. because they don't move in lockstep in returns and you drift. And there's a cost to rebalancing back to that as well. And so you have to rationalize, why are we getting off the targets? Are there tailwinds to one market to run the more? Should we let it run? Recall in the investment policy statement, the board gives the staff targets for an asset class, and then it gives ranges around those targets. So the staff has a decision to make, where in those ranges should we be? And that's an ongoing discussion. We have a standing asset allocation and performance committee meeting once a month to discuss those trends. And we very consciously make decisions to allow overweights or underweights to persist or to take them off the table. An overlay program is a super efficient and cost-effective way to do that. You're not having to sell physical assets all the time to adjust that. So you can, in the future space, do it very cheap and effectively manage your risk better. So that's the last piece of the implementation program that we're working on this year. The goal of talent, attracting, training, retaining talent. I say this repeatedly, this organization is really a human talent organization. It's 85, 90, 95% intellectual brain power and discipline within this vision and values that I open this commentary with. And then we have a technology and tools that we wrap around it. Call it 10%. So it's a 90% human talent organization. What I noticed in the staff that we started with this year, I think when I was hired in November of 23, we had roughly 100 FTEs. I was told we had authority to go to 120. We instead went down to 80 because we were systematically going through the organization. And in some cases, we had some redundancies where there was 4 or 5 positions that we just rationalized that we didn't need. But we also had some folks, that didn't have the culture and the drive and commitment that we're requiring out of people. And we've kind of got a core of folks that are now dedicated to the cause, and we're going to grow new talent around that core. But one of my observations has been there was a dearth of training for all of the staff in both technical skills and professional skills. For example, somebody, who gets promoted up to a supervisor who's had no management skills, and they're just thrown into the mix and they suffer, and invariably their subordinates suffer. So we've got to address that. And, when you see that situation, whose fault really is that, right? Is that the supervisor's fault or the supervisor's supervisor? It's a training problem. And I see the same thing in technical skills, very inconsistent technical skills. So our biggest push, if I had to boil everything down to 2 words for 2025, it's recruiting and training. We have this wonderful new training facility. We are starting the permanent school. And we have just launched the technical training side where we're going to have Excel 1, 2, 3, advanced data management and artificial intelligence tools to help. We're going to do the same thing in PowerPoint, 1, 2, and 3, advanced presentation methods and artificial intelligence tools. Artificial intelligence is, going to be omnipresent in everything we do. We're trying to make sure the staff has consistent baseline training in how to use those tools. And we found tools that are highly secure tools that, we can keep control of the data within our own environment through Microsoft's AI applications. On the professional training side, I euphemistically call it, we're going to start with, so you're a supervisor now, 101. And then go to management skills, and then leadership skills, and then team building and executive coaching. And we're bringing in professionals to help do that. Our longer term goal is that we're developing talent in-house to do that training in the long run. So as we onboard new folks will go through all of it. I'm so serious about this, and I had a little bit of pushback from some staff going, I don't know, I don't need that training. I said, we all need it. Because even if you're at a high level, as someone made a comment like, well, I don't do spreadsheets anymore. My staff does them. Well, if you don't know what is capable of being done, you can't really manage that process that effectively. And so to put my money where my mouth is, yours truly is going to Excel 1, 2, 3, and 4 in advance. And we're all going through it. So we all understand the capability of our tools and we're going to use them to great effect. This is going to take the better part of 2025 and probably into 2026. And then, as I said, we'll have refreshers for the whole course. We'll have an onboarding kind of thing. But this is possibly the most important effort to just get far more efficiency and creativity out of this team. And we've got to give everybody the same tools and baselines and able to challenge each other. The chief legal officer search has been ongoing. We retained a professional recruiting firm to help us with that position. And we're getting close. We've seen some excellent candidates. I'm optimistic by the time we have our next board meeting, we'll have a new chief counsel here. I did hire a young recruiter who had been recruiting in the tech world in the Texas area, and she is outstanding, high energy, has the very much a recruiter lens in how she views things. We are reaching out to universities across the state to establish relationships with their kind of recruiting functions, and we've got a lot of momentum happening there. And it's we're going to start with our class of interns for this year. And I think of the 24 positions we're asking the legislature to approve, I would guess that maybe a quarter of them to a third might be mid-career professionals, but we are going to intentionally bias that towards entry-level and early career folks, because they bring the energy, they bring the technical expertise, and we can mold them into our cultural mindset and our values. So the internship programs and the linkages with the universities are going to be hugely valuable in that regard, because there's no better interview process than having someone work with you for a year that how they behave day in and day out. And they graduate, they should be kind of top of your list of candidates to consider. We also reached out to a Texas-based veterans recruiting firm. This is early days in this. I just made that connection, but a very, very low-cost network that is designed to bring veterans opportunities. And that's also an affinity group that I find is a talent-rich pool, and folks that have been, pardon the pun, but literally pressure tested in battle. I told my chief audit officer, who's a Army Airborne Ranger, that I doubt I'll ever make him cry. So these types of people that bring value added to our overall culture.
So Bob, what's the added FTEs one more time? How many are we going to add?
We're requesting 24 over the next 2.5 years. So take our head count to 115.
Gotcha.
That's of course predicated on the legislature approving our.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fill them. I mean, that gives you the chance to do that,
right?
But you're going to do that as you see as necessary.
Right, and it's a long process. And I tell folks, I have people who are buried and they need help, and I need another resource. I said, well, I got good news and bad news. The good news is you can have another resource. The bad news is you got to write a job description, post ads, go through resumes, have first round, second round, third round interviews, find to get someone on board, train them, orient. So you're actually going to be more buried for about 6 to 9 to 12 months. And then you'll start getting some relief. And we've got to get the recruiting right, because I have to tell you, some of this downsizing that occurred last year, and I guess it's fortunate with the way the political winds are blowing. We kind of already did our Doge-like exercise last year, but it's a painful process, and divorce is painful and expensive, and so you want to avoid it at all costs. So you've got to get the recruiting right. I couldn't hire 24 people today if I wanted to. I mean, it's going to take a couple of years if we're doing it right. One of the
Went down from 120 to 80.
no, we had 100, we had, authority to go to 120, but we went to 80.
180, okay, thank you.
And we're asking for now 115 instead of 120, because I alluded to about 4 or 5 of those positions were ones that we truly eliminated. For instance, when we moved the internal management of fixed income and equity outside, we no longer needed the back office functionality associated with that. So those are positions we don't need to replace. But the others were ones that we need the positions, we just didn't have the right players in them. And we got to fill that too. So we're probably about 9 FTEs under right now. So, you know, if you put those two numbers together, that's 33 hires. I think that's going to take every bit of 2.5 years to find the right candidates there. So my guess is it's probably like an 8 to 10 a year, maybe this little bit front loaded, but that's the pace, about 8 to 10 a year. One of the organizational areas that we want to spend a little more focus on is our whole operations and finance, and making sure we've got that structured the way we want. We've also launched a health and wellness initiative, and we're fortunate to have excellent gymnasium facilities in the building as well. So once again, it's taking advantage of the new operating infrastructure we have here. In our communications, this is a goal. We had a good bit of talk about this. I have to say, this is the goal I think we've made the least amount of progress on in the last year, because we have to prioritize some things. We prioritized internal controls. We prioritized asset allocation. We prioritized implementation. Communications, there's a lot of room for improvement. And we look at this as concentric circles, starting with this board as our central source of communication. But then, the next rung out is our stakeholders at the legislature, and the next rung out is our stakeholders in the schools and administration of schools, and so on and so forth. Business groups, taxpayers, universities. Keep in mind, every dollar that we put in the available school fund is a dollar that doesn't otherwise have to be levied in taxes. So we not only benefit K through 12 students, we benefit every taxpayer in the state. Then, having that awareness of what we do out there with business groups is important, and it's an important source for deal flow and recruiting as well. So we're going to focus a lot on this. We have a real gap in the human resources side of communications. That's a priority recruiting area. But we are working on our social media presence, primarily right now through LinkedIn, but we'll be exploring other areas here. The final grouping of goals I wanted to talk about are the governance and internal controls. And we yesterday presented our first read drafts of a comprehensive board governance policy. I'll let Chairman Kinsey talk about the elements of that in his report, as well as the first round of ethics committee. But these are going through the appropriate subcommittees, and we hope to have second reads at our next meeting next quarter, and be soon in a posture to approve and adopt these policies. They are living, breathing policies that we will regularly review and modify going forward. Once we've adopted a governance policy, I think training at the highest level, meaning this executive staff and this board on governance training, is something that we should prioritize, where we're all baselining our own understanding of the roles and responsibilities of everybody in this room. And much like, what I noted with the staff, we clearly have not had that training here either. So we need to put our money where our mouth is. In the internal control side of things, we prioritized creating an internal audit division, recruiting a chief audit officer, creating an audit and ethics committee, and retaining a third-party external auditor as well. All of those things were implemented last year, and internal audit has launched its first audits now. So in a year, we went from nothing to a functioning internal audit program group. And we have now implemented and launched a master system to control internal audit processes called Audit Board that will allow the internal audit team to collect, aggregate, monitor progress on testing, and an excellent reporting tool up to the audit and ethics committee. The last goal is the one goal we're going to remove, and that was the facilities goal, because here we are, on time, under budget, really good. We had got out of the old facility a month ahead of schedule, and there was a couple of other initiatives under the facilities goal. They have been appropriately reallocated in other silos. Last item I have in my comment is kind of outlining a cadence for this cycle of board meetings. And what I have up on the screen and before you is the next biennium's meetings for 2025 and 2026. And just want to give you a thought of, expectations. As I said earlier, I think a portfolio update has to be front and center on every single meeting. And because we're waiting on data, we're usually a quarter lagged. So, but you'll see Q1, Q2, Q3, this will just become like the minutes. You're going to see the performance numbers. The asset class reviews, we recall last April, we did one time, 3 groups, deep dive. It was kind of a first shock treatment to get this information in front of the board, where we brought our private equity teams, our real estate teams, and our nascent private credit teams in front of this board to present, talk about their processes, their team, their results. This is really the first portfolio update. That's high level, top line information. What you really want to absorb is the more detailed information, and that's so massive that we have to take it in bites. So the thought is we have a regular rotational program, and you'll see we just it starts repeating itself. Debt, real assets, private equity, public equity, debt, real assets, private. So the board that can then get confidence that if I've got questions about some space, and I really want more information to satisfy my intellectual curiosity, you can take comfort in knowing it will be addressed in those times. Likewise, we do have the planning and budget cycle. Not only, every 2 years we have to do the whole LAR request, at least for the foreseeable future. But we need a more formalized mechanism through our comp and budget committee, in which we are taking those appropriated dollars and really splitting them out in a granular way that tracks our general ledger and how we actually book expenses, so we can monitor our adherence to our budget. That there was no formal process for doing that. I think I pointed out to some of y'all last time, we just hired our first dedicated budget officer, excellent young recruit that's helping pull this together. But we will be through the comp and budget committee doing quarterly reviews of budget tracking, but we will annually report that up to the board as well. And then distributions. This is, obviously we will have all kinds of other ad hoc items added to board agendas, but I'm proposing that these are standing things that are going to happen and you all can expect to happen. And, happy to take, input on, if this should be reordered or make any modifications to it. But I think this would make it manageable, where over the course of the year, this board has seen all the investment highlights, and they've been able to take rather deep dives and pieces in a manageable and digestible pace. There is some other things that I think would be very helpful for having us operate at a best practices level of governance. And the fact that we will be now gathering here every quarter with committee meetings throughout the day on Wednesday and board meeting the next day, there's an opportunity to get together and break bread in the evenings and maybe bring in some of our strategic partners to do little roundtable discussions or educational presentations. I had originally intended that we had an open house last night. It was too early. Building space wasn't quite ready. We weren't quite ready. I'm going to propose that at our May meeting, we have that open house where we invite a lot of folks from our stakeholders, from folks from the legislature, folks from the educational community, other folks that we want to outreach to, and we'll have a function in this building that I think we can do a great job with this facility. But one thing that I have found in my experience that works really, really well, but it's going to take a commitment from this board to be able to do it, and that is having our own standing annual conference retreat. And I'll paint a picture of what I think that looks like. And it can, it doesn't have to be somewhere else. It could be here, but it could be somewhere, more remote. But you have a facility in which you gather for, say, a 2-day period where a day and a half of it is educational presentations by our service providers, our top managers, our consultants, our legal teams on anything that the board, has continuing curiosity about, that we can have a time to do deep dives on this when we're not being pulled 6 other directions. Have a nice social function in between that. And, maybe at the end of the second day, allow some time while we're all together to have a business meeting too, and to take care of, other business items. I have found that to be an extremely valuable tool in building the collegiality and teamwork amongst the executive management and the board to educate the board and staff on critical functions. And it also, much like I said, if a member has, I mentioned if a member was curious about an asset class and when am I going to hear about it? Well, this cadence is telling you in that quarterly meeting, you're going to get a deep dive. But there's going to be a lot more things that come up in the board discussions in which the board said, look, we would really like more information on XYZ and how does this work and what are our duties? Well, we can say, we're going to put that on our retreat agenda and we're going to bring in subject matter experts and we'll dive in as deep as everyone is willing to go. So if this was resonating with the board, y'all let me know and direct it. If y'all are willing to commit the time, we will make it happen. We'll come up with dates, agendas, and venues to do it. That's my last real soundbite I wanted to give you all today. Happy to take any questions or comments or anything.
Questions? Right.
Talk about the topic of the day is AI. I know we're investing in it through digital infrastructure and the theme, but as it relates to funds, managing funds, tools that funds use, whether we're using them now or we know they're on the horizon, what are sort of the sound bites we should be thinking about as it relates to the fund?
Yeah, so AI is obviously become pervasive in our economy very suddenly and in a big way. And many of you, if you even see the updates you have on every time you update your phone operating system, new things are coming out. I'm looking at texts now that have been paraphrased and restated, and I was like, wait, I didn't say it. It's like, it's everywhere, and we need to embrace it for all of its value, but we also need to be, eyes wide open for all of its pitfalls and risks. At the highest level, though, we're invested in AI in a big way. We have a huge amount of money in the S&P 500. And the S&P 500.
Everybody is in theory.
Right, exactly. Whether you know it or not, we have a significant portion in AI companies. And some, that little shock that came into the market when DeepSeek was announced and it was the low-cost provider, and suddenly I think Nvidia's fell like 14% in a day or something like that. Yeah, we felt it. There's a lot of money. But there's this whole, that's a loaded question, right? Because there's this whole spectrum of where is AI crossing into the permanent school fund? We're invested in it, and we want to use the tools to do a better job. We spent a lot of time on cybersecurity in the audit committee yesterday about how we're approaching that. One of the things we're doing, I mentioned it in training, after you've got the 1, 2, 3 in advance, it's the AI application pieces of it. So training the staff how to use it effectively, but using it in a controlled environment. Our IT team, and this is where I'll get quickly over my expertise, but they have, Microsoft AI is a very risk-contained system that, allows us to still preserve the sanctity of our data and what we're using, our data for, and not lose it out to some, application out in the far reaches of deep space and that. And you stack that too with the governor has issued an executive order on, activities related to China. And it's a broad sweeping thing, what do you have invested in China? Don't travel to China. Don't use Chinese AI for software type packages. So what we're attempting to do though is find the most risk controlled tool that we can consistently use and train our people on how to use it. There's incredible efficiencies for us to gain, but it's only as good as your training and knowledge. And so I think, is that responsive to your question? Because it's pervasive throughout the whole.
It is. I was thinking more sort of opportunities, but the risks are good to know as well. I mean, there's definitely an internal control risk element to our data, how we use it. If we're training a model using our data and how we keep the sanctity of that, that's an
Right. Microsoft's Copilot is kind of the gold standard for that.
Right.
And so that's what we're going to be trained on. And we are exploring partnering opportunities with the University of Texas on, because they have, as you imagine, incredible groups of young people learning machine learning. It's the hot dot in college education now. And we also have the opportunity to get some real talent to help us build models and because it's, I said, it's it's a human resource game, but with technology around it. And we have staggering amounts of data that we would like to process. I think you got a little preview of some of the things we're trying to process in our risk management and asset allocation. Well, these tools can help us potentially do a far better job, far more efficiently in mastering control of that data. And it's going to take the effort to build these kind of things. But I see in the near future that we are able to leverage this staff to a much higher level of effectiveness and capability by harnessing those tools. But we're trying to do it in a very measured fashion that we don't, have any security issues.
A few questions. One on the brand. I really like the actual brand. The question, have you registered that as a trademark?
Oh, we have not.
I'm a recovering patent. I suggest that.
Did you just register it under your name now? An opportunity. Yes. Oh, it's underway.
Oh, great. Okay. No,
It's underway.
Okay.
Underway.
Great news. So peer pressure can be good or bad. I've got 3 teenagers. You talked about benchmarking versus the peers. Who's leading? Who's following? Do you want to follow all the time? Do you want to lead? How do you and all of these, if they're too detailed or anything, we can take them off.
Well, first off, that's one of those great questions that ends up as a deep dive in a retreat. But generally speaking, I'll tell you my experience. The peer group is simply a data point of a mosaic of input that this board should be looking at to go, are we structured in the way we should be? And are we implementing in the way we should be? And there's a lot of things that we have to take in consideration. I used to talk about this in terms of liabilities, you know, because that's the insurance executive in me or the banker. But I look at, you know, we have a liability to the available fund. People get confused when I use that term, but that's our purpose, right? Where our cash flow is. And what that says is, you know, we recall the exercise, we look at our expected return. We want to have a goal of maintaining the purchasing power per student over time. So that means we have to take into account inflation expectations, student growth expectations. And so broadly speaking, your liabilities should be the most important thing that informs your asset mix. So peer groups is a data point to make sure that you're not missing something, but it's not the holy grail to follow. But it's important. We actually put in our, it was a component in the comp plan, 10% was how are you doing versus your peers? I do have some concerns about us moving towards our peer group asset allocation. And the concerns are this fund is rather late to the game. And there's a lot of our peers that kind of got over allocated in private equity. And the thing about private markets is when your public markets fall and you find yourself overweight in that asset class, you can't take money off the table easily. You know, it's going to come when it comes, and it usually comes in the opposite direction of what you want. You know, when you want it to grow and have more, the cash is coming back to you real fast. And then when you're over allocated and you hope it comes back, then the distribution stops. So it's an art, and we will have a deep dive when we do public equity. We'll show you again we project these things. I look at it like an accordion, you know, that our cash flow projections are moving around. So I'm a little reticent to, you know, try to go all the way to our peers at a point where the peers may be, you know, coming back towards us, right? So generally speaking, it's a data point. It's a very important data point. And it's one that you can gain a lot of insight on what some of the best funds are doing, not only in the asset allocation, but how they're implementing. You know, within it, that you don't really get through peer group data, but you get it through the intel. And so we want to be able to get the best ideas and best practices from our peers. It's really good in governance for it to say. You know, like when we're doing our governance policy, first thing we've said is like, well, this is not new ground. There's innumerable excellent endowment funds that have been putting together governance policies for decades that have been polished to a bright sheen. Let's look at the best ones and pick and choose language that can help us. But in terms of just our peer group ranking of our total fund return versus our peer group, you know, it's a data point, but it can lead to some spurious conclusions, and it can lead you, you know, lemmings off the cliff if you're not careful. So,
and then as the new guy, I'm definitely interested in the board training. I mentioned to you as well in our orientation of some of your staff training, if that would be applicable to us. Love an invite for that. And then also the board training, I'm definitely interested. Couple of quick questions. Do you have a general back of the envelope size of the ASF versus the PSF contribution? How much of the ASF is made up of the money PSF contributes?
well, so the PSF contributes $4.8 billion over the next biennium. And if I understood, that's the 5A distribution. The 5G distribution has a statutory maximum of $600 million a year. Currently, we are proposing the maximum, so it's $1.2 billion, and that's primarily coming off of the oil and gas royalty program managed by the GLO. This board sets the 5G rate. This board recommends a range of the 5A rate to the Board of Education, who picks a rate within that range, and the two together. So it's
Six.
Yeah.
Six all in all, and anyone know the total ASF?
Is it 4.8 combined?
It's 5.5G.
Yeah, the 4.8 is the combined. Sorry, so
Okay.
it's 4.8 minus 1.6, so
Got it.
3.
too.
Mr. Hickman, I'm not sure if this is where you're going with your question, but there's some other aspects of the available pool fund and lottery and motor vehicle, funds and so forth. And
Yeah, that's right. The total for the coming biennium is about 7.3 or 7.4 billion from all sources. Of that, the PSF makes up 4.8.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my last comment is on the external auditor you mentioned. I read through the board manual, I'm not sure what we call that. And I just want to be sure, the way the rule's written, that you're picking of an external auditors in consultation with us.
It's specifically approved by the board.
Yeah, I saw it was approved, but I want to be sure it's not after the fact.
No,
So
no,
kind of a
it's
chicken and egg.
through the audit and ethics committee.
Okay.
The whole design of the search and who the candidates were, and the
So let's take-
process was very transparent of how we came to that.
Yeah, let's take that offline. It may just be a tweak to the language to be sure that we're in the ground floor.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah, there's even I would, get a chance to just go back and read through the bylaws and, but yeah, that's one of the duties of this board is to hire that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to, it's the way the rules drafted. Thank you.
Further questions? I would kind of like for, Keith Ponkowski, welcome, to Colony, Austin, Texas. I'm from South Carolina, Keith is, a consultant from NEPC. Usually we have Rhett here, and so we're honored to have Keith here. And Keith has been working with this with PSF since
2008/9, so a long time.
yeah. Why don't you just kind of your I mean, I know that you visit with our team pretty frequently, and maybe you've heard the presentation, but you're also interacting with our team pretty frequently. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. All the remarks made by Bob today were interesting. I think you're seeing one of the first slides was around culture and how you want to think, invest, and behave, and that actually feeds into Mr. Hickman's question around peer group. You've always been an endowment, but we've kind of managed the plan as a public fund, so very conservative in nature, internal management. One of those things to change the thinking was mentioned around the bond guarantee program, right? How much risk can we take? And I think that was finally clarified over the last year or two, but yes, we can take on more risk. So working with the team, you saw the changes flow through the asset allocation around introducing private credit, getting a little more active. So again, changing the way you invest, not necessarily becoming your peer group, but acting and thinking, like the other endowments do behave. Sitting through the meetings for the last, well, I guess it's almost 20 years now, 15 plus years. We were always benchmarking ourselves against endowments, but we weren't investing like an endowment. So now I think we're on that path to do that. Talking about the education, the offsite workshops for the board, I think is very important. I think the communication circle amongst kind of the stakeholders here involved is a refreshing change as well. So I think a lot of good positive things that are happening at the plan. And again, thinking about acting, investing, like your peer groups, the endowments out there.
And Keith, your NEPC is uniquely qualified to kind of comment on the value and efficacy of an annual retreat. Having participated in some with myself and Stu Bohart, also having participated in some, but maybe just if you give a little color or soundbite broadly about, how NEPC and some other clients take advantage of the incredible intellectual horsepower that we are contracted with hundreds of firms. And it was my observation sometimes that boards like this don't take advantage of that and the power of bringing it together.
Yeah, I think it's, so just high level, the workshops, right? Today, there's obviously a set agenda. I think that the workshops are important. We internally do at least 2 workshops a year, right? So in January, unfortunately, we all fly to Boston. as goal there, but we sit down and we game plan for the year. What do the markets look like? You know, what are our thoughts? What's our conversation going to be with our clients? We do a deeper dive. You know, Bob mentioned deeper dive. We do that out in Arizona once a year with some of our bigger public fund clients. Again, you guys would sort of fit in there, sort of public, sort of endowment there. And then again, bringing in your strategic partners, right? Leaning on them as far as their knowledge, their depth. What are they seeing from other endowments out there? What are they doing? Can you leverage that? We were on a call, Stu, Jared, and a few others last week talking about the overlay program. Right? So conversation was, who are your clients using? Who do you all like? Right? We brought in a name. I think they were in town this week or last week already, leveraging that. Another one of our clients uses that. So again, extending that knowledge base kind of across our client base, plus back to you and answering any questions that you may have on that front.
Something that sometimes I take it for granted that things go without saying, but having a conference or retreat like this, NEPC would be an integral part of that, a big participant in it and help in actually identifying and laying it out. And that's, you know, like I said, we're pulled together all of our resources, the managers, our consultants, our attorneys, and bring the horsepower to bear on the topics that the board finds most timely and useful, and or things that the staff, you know, wants the board to be aware of and understand. And in my experience, it's the best way to bring everybody's skill set, knowledge base up together, and team build and pull people together and working. And it can be very informative, a lot of work, but it can be fun too.
Yeah, we've done it with a bunch of clients. Again, limited distractions and a chance to otherwise meet some of the partners outside of the immediate team that you otherwise want to work with.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'd ask Stu, as the former president of Morgan Stanley Asset Management, to maybe give a couple of comments about how a large investment management firm views such invitations. And maybe highlighted just a couple of town halls that we've done that could very well be part of a retreat.
Yeah, so I remember going to these at Wampee with South Carolina. They're challenging for the investment managers. We talk about having struggle sessions here where we challenge each other and we explore ideas, and the board retreats with your strategic partners are the mother of all struggle sessions, where the best ideas are brought forward, they're explored with some of the best minds in the business. We are building strategic partnerships here and have access to some of the best minds in the business. Bob's talked about our line items going from 700 and some down over time as we focus on the best managers, focus on the value of our permanent capital, focus on the relationships that will really allow us to be leaders in the endowment space. And those relationships really come together at these kinds of retreats where you get to explore ideas, talk about the big issues, talk about leading instead of following. So I found them extremely challenging. I was a manager for Bob. That's challenging, but good for us and good for the endowment. And I'd encourage you to think about how we put that together. We've had kind of flavors of that in that we have town halls where we invite some of our bigger partners to come in, the most senior people in the investment management people, business come, and their PMs and other people speak to us and talk about trends, talk about what other clients are doing, talk about how we can work with them as a partner. And the annual retreat is really a culmination of that, of how we move forward. It gets to this issue around, very broadly around our benchmarks. You know, one of our goals is to lead. Right now we're playing catch up a little bit and thinking about how we expand into private equity, private credit, how we monetize the value of permanent capital. It's an enormous asset that PSF needs to monetize for school children in Texas, and we've begun doing that. But ultimately, we want to be a leader, not a follower in the endowment space. And that will mean working with the board and working with our strategic partners to think about how we take advantage of opportunities in the market, whether that's a asset class for special opportunities, whether it's over time moving towards a inflation plus sort of a benchmark instead of what we do now. These are the interesting questions that we really want to get into at these retreats. So we have a lot of work to do. You've seen enormous progress over the last 14 months since Bob started. We got a lot more work to do, and I think this kind of retreat would be instrumental in achieving it.
Stu mentioned something, I think, Member Hickman, this is a little bit of an adjunct to your question about peers. Benchmarking is something we struggle with and all funds struggle with. We pick benchmarks so we have something to measure ourselves against. You know, we always want to measure progress, right? But, you know, they can lead to erroneous conclusions because they're imperfect themselves. And sometimes you almost want to use a mosaic of multiple benchmarks to really get the picture of how programs work. And at the highest level, you know, at some point we may revisit the entire structure of how we benchmark at all, thinking more about the ultimate end game of steady rising distributions to the ASF. And if that's our really reason for being, we may want to consider a complete different view of how you benchmark. That's a high level topic that requires lots of deep dive and education and understanding and perfect tailor-made to these kind of things. And you know, and when you don't solve it in the first year in the first retreat, you know, what you have to have is this continuity of knowing that you're doing them and they build on them. And but by the time you're, you know, 3-4 years down the road, you know, it's really starting to show its value.
And just a note, we have, NEPC also has a conference. Historically was in May, but has always been in May in Boston. And being that we are clients of NEPC, members of this board are eligible to go to that. And we have over the years sent some folks to that, and get a chance to go and that gives you an opportunity to kind of listen to, you know, trends and talk to peers that are in the space. And so if you get an opportunity to do that, we would encourage that, and we should be seeing something on that.
So we're on a 18-month cycle now. So last one was September, so it'll be the following May will be the next one. Annually, we're doing in May. Feedback on clients with May is tough. You got college graduations, summer's coming up, vacation. So we're sort of toggling back and forth in September, May. But yeah, to your point, great opportunity to meet a lot of your peer groups, people that sit on boards facing the same kind of issues and so forth. So I think May 26th might be the next one.
And I just want to just make a notation that Aaron Kinsey and Melissa Perez-Diaz are with us on virtually. So we can see you. And so did y'all have any questions at all for Bob or any comments?
None for me.
All right, and I just want to just kind of close this this agenda item by saying, you know, when we kind of went down this path with the formation of the corporation in 2021, this is a lot kind of what we had in mind. We had no idea what that would actually look like. We knew that we needed to, you know, transform the fund, and just in terms of culturally and otherwise to lean forward and to fulfill its mission. There were a lot of, you know, things involved in all of that, but this was one of them. And I'm just, Bob, we just thank you for the work that you guys are doing. You know, and I hope that the staff, if they're listening, you know, thank you for the good work that you're doing. The work that you do every day that you come here to this building really matters. It really makes an impact on the lives of school children and the people who teach them and mentor them each and every day. And thank you for that. And we know that there are bigger and better things on the horizon. And so let's just keep our feet moving and just understand that this mission is bigger than anybody in this room. And that we have a period of time to plant trees under whose shade we will probably never sit. but we have an opportunity to make a difference and leave a legacy in the lives of a lot of children in future Texans. And so thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to move. We're going to go ahead and keep moving here. It's 11:16, and we have one more item to get to before we have an executive session item. And so we're on item 5, and I think I'm going to hand off to Goldhart. Discussion on public equities and absolute return strategies, asset classes. This is a discussion item, no action, and so too.
Thank you, Chairman Finzi, members. It is terrific to be here. I'm 13 months in, and echo what Chairman Maynard said. It's an honor to be here, and it's a privilege to be here. As I've mentioned before, I believe what we're doing here is core to equal opportunity in America. Public education is important, and for the table, I thank you for the opportunity to work for the PSF. I think God likes Texas, and God likes the PSF because we've had a terrific year evolving the portfolio. But as I say to Bob, it's been a terrific year. We're in granny gear. We're going to have to shift to first gear and then second gear. So we've got a lot of work to do to lead in this space and to generate the kind of returns that will have a dramatic impact on the school children of Texas. If we turn to page 2 here, you'll see the 2 areas we're talking about: absolute return, which is our hedge fund business at $3 billion and about $14 billion in public equities. That $14 billion, about 27% of the endowment. That is a big number. Over time, we would expect that to come down as we take advantage of the opportunities in less liquid assets. But as Mr. Borden said, timing's everything. We're not going to rush in. We're going to be steady about monetizing the permanent capital, the PSF. All our strategies are evolving, and these 2 are no exception. The absolute return strategy is a little bit overweight from target, and you will see why. The public equity strategy is basically straight on target as far as asset allocation. The reason we're doing this together is it's an example of how we're breaking down silos. Our portfolio managers and asset class heads are focused on their specific area, but they are also focused on the whole, and they are compensated for the whole. This is one team, and this one team is working more and more closely together under the leadership of Bob. And these areas are a good example of that. We will start with public equity, give a high-level overview. The entire presentation is about 15 minutes and give you a flavor for how we're evolving the process. It's not finished, but we have good results to share. Andrew Bunker runs the public equity team. Why don't you introduce yourself and your team, and then we'll get into what's going on in the space.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. So I'll quickly introduce the team. Again, I'm Andrew Bunker. We're in the Permanent School Fund in 2008. I've held a variety of different roles and responsibilities, not only within global public equities, but also in fixed income real return. I'm a vice president. I'm currently leading the public equity investment team. The team is also supported by Pinder Fitzgerald, who's a talented young investment analyst. He joined us in 2022. He was hired right out of St. Edward's University, and he has degrees in mathematics and data analytics, and handles a lot of our quantitative, rigorous analytical work. So we're a lean team and highly efficient.
Great, thank you. So that's good. So let me describe a little bit how public equity has evolved. We're 27%. I would expect that to shrink over time as we fund other areas and balance the portfolio. It's been a good time to be in public equities and a pretty remarkable run, particularly over the last year. So we have been in the right place at the right time, but we do want to take advantage of the highly valuable primary asset, nearly $60 billion of permanent capital, and the returns that can come from that. So we would expect to reallocate from this space into other areas over time, and you've seen that already in the new strategic asset allocation that was put in place last year. We also eliminated emerging market exposure, which included China. So, we were a little bit ahead of our time on this, and we do not have PRC exposure except in some illiquid private equity funds where it would not make sense to exit given the discounts associated with that, but our public market exposure is de minimis. We're focused on developed markets and primarily developed markets in the US. We have a great growth opportunity here. Texas is a leader in that opportunity, but our focus is going to be primarily developed over the near term and primarily US. The change has been around moving away from internal management of index funds to external management where we can achieve net returns in excess of the benchmark. That is, we cover our costs, we have net returns, we have positive alpha, and we're taking advantage of some of these opportunities in the market. Brad Wright asked about AI and machine learning, and we'll touch on that a little bit. The market has changed. Public markets are becoming less important in terms of the number of companies listed, the volume in the public market, the amount of economy that's represented in the public markets. Private markets have taken more space up. You'll see the opportunities in that when we go through private equity in future meetings. But we also see a big opportunity in the amount of data that is now available and the engines of AI and machine learning and our ability to create performance in excess of benchmarks by using external managers who have those skill sets. These skill sets often reside in bigger managers that can absorb the expenses. Some of these things just not possible in a smaller group. So we have repurposed our teams and our focus to use best-in-class external management and focus our internal people on areas where they can add value. The benefits of this, in addition to excess performance, are decreased operational risk and decreased expense. In fact, in public equities this year, we'll run about $1 million less in our own expense through these moves. And we'll do that while we generate excess performance. In some ways, I guess we were early on China and early on Doge, because first thing Bob did when he came here was look at the budgets and talk about efficiency. And we are creating efficiency, which means both cost savings and improved performance in the public equity book. Our efforts are then focused on alpha generating initiatives where we can work with best-in-class managers to outperform our benchmarks, take advantage of quant opportunities. In the hedge fund space, we've recognized that many of our hedge funds had embedded equity and credit beta. That is fine, but we're going to measure them against their appropriate benchmarks. That is, when they're taking those kinds of risks, we are going to measure them against benchmarks that incorporate those types of risks. So you'll see when we get into absolute return that there's been changes in that space. And in our alpha generating initiatives around long-only public markets, we've incorporated some of those managers. We're also looking closely at active management in small and mid cap, as the market has become dominated by 7 large names. There's been less focus on some of the smaller companies. We believe there's an opportunity there. Keith, maybe you want to talk about 2 aspects of that. One is active management, small mid cap, and then maybe also just as a precursor to something I'll get to in a minute, equal weight versus large cap in the index.
Yeah, so I'll take the second half of that first. If you think this was an award show, the Grammy would go to the S&P cap weighted, right? So many accolades there, the best asset class, 5 out of 6 years, 2 years of 20+% returns, all-time high the other day. But, and Mr. Wright brought up, AI is sort of concentrated, and you mentioned Mag 7, I'd say maybe 6, Tesla's kind of bouncing around, but some of those bigger tech names, that concentration with it, right? Great returns, but there comes a risk with that. We mentioned DeepSeek the other day. NVIDIA, I think, was down $400 billion in one day, right? So how can we, not only here, but with our clients, take some of those chips off the table, maintain some of that exposure, right? Not get rid of it, but maintain some of that exposure. I think Stu, you brought that up around equal weight and what that entails. And that's saying, hey, there's 493 other companies out there that could bring value. And as these returns broaden out, we think there's an opportunity to capture more alpha there in that large cap space versus sort of what we've seen over the years. Small mid, right? So you talk about the largest 500, you come down the cap there, the next 2,000, 2,500 names in there. Certainly an opportunity to add value. I was actually in a meeting yesterday. The same question came up. Should we be passive? Should we be active in that space? And we went out 10, 15-year track record. And in that space, we added 2.5 percentage points net of fees above that benchmark, right? So you're going to hire managers that are going to take 50 names, 60 names, maybe a little bit more, not 2,000. And most of those 2,000 are not profitable, right? So you're going to hire quality names that are going to hold up the test of time, good management, good products, good teams, and you can add value to that. And again, that's one of the changes I think Mr. Manning talked about, sort of been here since 2008. We've been passive. Let's think differently. Hey, we're great to get the benchmark, but if we could beat the benchmark and where we can do it, we're willing to pay some fees, but net above the fees, add value there. So two ideas that we're seeing across our client bases, not unique. The one is, hey, we've made a ton of money in the S&P and the calculated, but again, driven by 7 names. How can we take some money off the table, but still capture some of that? And then certainly down the cap, there's a lot of opportunity. There's no new news on Apple. Nobody's going to uncover a new stone on Apple, but one of the smaller companies out there, certainly if your managers are willing to do the work, you can add value relative to the benchmark. So
That's great.
And just for people who are listening, maybe y'all talk about generating alpha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Explain that term for those who are maybe.
So at a high level, being very disciplined about taking risks to develop return. In the end, we take risk on behalf of school children in Texas, and we're good at it, and we seek to be better and better at it, right? And when you're better at it, for a unit of risk, you get more return, right? If you think about alpha specifically, you think about you've driven a hard bargain on the risk you're taking, and you're getting better returns than the benchmark for similar levels of risk. That can scale up. You may say, we're going to take a little bit more risk than the benchmark and get a lot more return. But that notion of driving a hard bargain in risk is really key to alpha. Are you good at what you do, or are you just going for the market ride? Right? We want people who are good at what they do. They drive a hard bargain on risk and deliver excess returns. And that is the general term alpha, that you've displayed your skill has come through. For any certain amount of risk, you've delivered more returns than the market provides just for general participation.
Yeah, just high level, the market is the beta, right? So getting not too far into the Greek letters here, but beta, add alpha to that.
Andrew, just a good intro here. Let's just cover briefly sort of the 3 broad categories of what we're doing in public equity.
We move to page 5 here. Yep. So within global public equities, we think about taking investment exposure and risk in 3 kind of core categories, ranging from passive to more traditional active strategies, is what we were just talking about, to seek alpha. In passive strategies, we typically engage investment managers to build a portfolio that mimics a specific underlying index or benchmark. And so they'll build a portfolio that looks exactly like that index. Our expectation in that type of investment is that we would get index or very close to index-like returns. And the trade-off for that is that we can get that type of exposure for near zero cost. So it's a very low-cost way to get the beta exposure that Keith just mentioned. Enhanced indexing, you can think about that as a hybrid between passive and active. The manager typically starts with an underlying benchmark and is very benchmark aware, but we give them a moderate risk budget to build a portfolio that looks something close to our index or benchmark, but not exactly. That type of strategy are typically quantitative in nature or very processed using some of the AI techniques, using large data sets. So we would expect over a full market cycle, modest excess return or modest alpha. that typically costs a little bit more, so it's still relatively low cost, but not as cheap as pure passive. And then active strategies, these are more traditional investment strategies where you think about an investment manager who has a team of analysts and they're actively picking stocks and building portfolios that are their main objective is to beat the benchmark or to beat their index. And those typically have some type of performance-based fee. So the manager in the permanent school fund are aligned in outperformance. If they do well, they can expect higher expected fees. One of the examples of the active management is our active beta 1 portfolio. And this is a cluster of directional equity funds that used to be bucketed in our absolute return or hedge fund portfolio. We have now removed those and have benchmarked them to what we think is a more appropriate long equity index. So it's part of our public equity exposure now. And Carlos.
Yeah, Carlos, to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's an important part of the portfolio and it's performed well to date, and we would expect it to grow in the future.
Yeah. Before you start, maybe you can introduce.
Well, he's going to, I know we're a little.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Quickly talk.
I think that this is a very good example of how we are trying to break the silos that we had before. And active beta, in essence, for us means that we're seeking to utilize the skill set that hedge fund managers have in picking stocks. And what we're trying to do is allow these managers to over or underweight a particular benchmark, in this case, the S&P 500, by utilizing those skills, generate excess returns. And in particular, in this case, what we have taken is all those managers that were in our hedge fund that were highly directional, that were very, very much exposed to the market versus a more neutral manager. So we took those out and put them in what we believe is the rightful place.
Yeah, and in our asset allocation, we appear to be very light in hedge funds. There's really two reasons for that. One, most endowments use the hedge fund bucket as a catch-all for all sorts of things and have managers in there that are very long the market, long credit, long equity. Our hedge fund bucket is now focused on return. High skill managers who are doing unique, difficult things to generate returns that we cannot generate elsewhere. So that's one reason the bucket looks a little bit small. The other reason is we are rebuilding this, and over time would expect it to grow. The managers who have demonstrated great skill at stock picking are now being measured against a much tougher benchmark, and that is the benchmark of S&P 500. And that's, Chairman Kinsey brought this up. Are we careful about the right benchmarks? And the answer is yes. We are careful about the right benchmarks. If you're taking more risk, you're going to be against a benchmark that takes more risk. So we map that carefully to our managers in the broad portfolio, and that is why we have used some of our hedge fund managers to manage long-only exposure. And we'll get into it a little bit more in the absolute return part of the portfolio. On the next page on the slide, you have the slide shows our current public equity breakdown, and it tells you that we are dominant on U.S. large cap, which means the S&P 500, which means right now it means 7 names. Andrew, what's the percentage of the 7 names roughly?
Close to or just over 30% of the index is now dominated by those 7 names.
So I would argue that market cap weighted index is what it is, right? But that is highly unusual that you buy the S&P 500 and you're really exposed significantly to those 7 names. That's been a great thing. These companies, we've made a lot of money by having big positions in these 7 names, but we should think about our long-term mission and about the damage drawdowns can do to our long-term mission. And so we will get into that in a second, how we're thinking about that. Right now, we are exposed predominantly to the U.S., 80% in the U.S., and mostly large cap. We'll begin to make some changes around the edge on that. In the middle there, you'll see we have developed Western Europe, and then the Asia portion at 7.56% is almost entirely Japan. Again, developed markets, also some Australia and other, but not the PRC. In terms of strategy weight, we're roughly 50-50 passive and enhanced. You would expect, or we would expect over time to grow that active piece at 7%. That will be both the best-in-class, long-biased hedge fund managers who share when they do a good job, they get paid. When they do a poor job, they do not get paid. That is the nature of the performance fees. And also there's a chance to, as we look at other quant and enhanced managers, to grow that. But we will have a core amount in passive that will mimic the index. Next page, performance in the public equity space. I'll focus just on the 1 year. We're 56 basis points under in all of our public equity. And the reason for that is threefold. One, transaction cost. Bob mentioned that we have moved over half the portfolio, including almost all equities in the last year. There are costs to doing that, and we have beat the benchmark over the last year. That is a testament to a terrific group of people here, good partners, good strategic partners that have been supporting us. And as I mentioned, God love in Texas and the PSF, because I would not have expected that we could beat the benchmark when we're moving half our assets, and yet we did. The 56 basis points were behind over the year related to transaction costs. They're related to a bit of a mixed bag in our new managers. Some have done extremely well. Some are lagging a little bit. We don't measure people quarter by quarter by quarter. We measure them, well, we do measure them quarter by quarter, month by month, and sometimes week by week. But what really matters is 3 years. So we give people time. We choose partners. We trust them. We watch them closely. One of our enhanced managers in tech has done a fantastic job for us. And it'll be, people will have their moments, but I will just note they've done a terrific job for us. The other piece that's in here is we have begun to move from cap weighted to equal weight in S&P. That reduces our risk. We have significant exposure to the S&P 500 and therefore to the top 7 names. By moving to equal weight, we diminish that risk. We feel it's prudent. We're not trying to pick the exact bottom. I will note that relative performance tends to work very well in our favor in drawdowns. The times when equal weight dramatically outperformed the S&P 500 cap weight. 2 examples: 2001 in the tech crash, and 2008 in the broader crash. So we feel that in reducing risk, we're being prudent. That is also in that 56 basis points. That said, look at our U.S. equity performance relative to our peers, large endowment. We beat the median. And these are smart people, right? The endowments have performed very well. We are above median over all time frames. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see the actual numbers where we exceed median. Over 10 years, this group has added $250 million of excess performance to the endowment, which just shows the value of a good team, how we pay for ourselves, and how we increase the overall endowment. That concludes public equities. You will see the overlap as we move into absolute return. Carlos, can you introduce yourself and the team?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stu. I'm Carlos Castro. I've been around since 1999 at the PSF, so I've seen a lot of good change. I've held several positions here. I was
25 years.
25 years. I've been in the equity team. I did fundamental investing. I did trading, futures, equities, you name it. And a decade ago, I moved into the hedge fund space, which has been a joy to be in. I have 2 team members, 2 great team members, Andrew Messick. Andrew actually comes from an experience with family offices, so he's a very good allocator to hedge funds. He's been with us since 2012, so around 13 years, and has a plethora of investment experience. We also have another member, David Ewert. David actually joined us in 2017 And he has had great experience with fund advisors. So he actually worked for over a decade with Mesero, which was one of our hedge fund advisor managers. So we have a very robust team, 3 people, but with plenty of experience allocated to hedge funds.
The next slide. So I talked about evolution in this space, and the evolution in the hedge fund space is to focus on high value, high skill, difficult strategies that can produce returns in a variety of markets. And so we diminished the overall hedge fund portfolio as we focused on that space. And you'll see in a minute that it is going extremely well. What does that mean? It means low correlation to public markets. We don't need our hedge fund portfolio to mimic the S&P 500. As you see, we've got plenty of that exposure already. We need a hedge fund portfolio that performs when other things are not performing. So we have rebalanced the portfolio. We have removed the beta. We are focused on high skill, difficult strategies where we have best in class partners. We've concentrated the portfolio more, so we are important to these partners. That allows us to drive fee breaks. It allows us to get access to senior leadership. It allows us to improve performance. And in many cases, it allows us to get into portfolios that are closed to everyone else. And they're closed to everyone else because they're exceptional and they have capacity limits, and because of who we are and our willingness to engage with these managers, we're able to get access. And part of this, a bit back to the Doge effort, we are saving money. We have fewer line items, less complexity, a smaller team, 2025 between external vendors that we are able to reorient towards internal capabilities and driving other cost savings. We've saved $5 million for the permanent school fund and bottom line expense in 2025, and we expect that to go up next year to $6 million. So better performance, less complexity, less cost, and a better component of our overall asset allocation. The funds that were moved to more appropriate benchmarks included $431 million in private credit, some in high yield, and some in active beta 1, which is the long only manager. Those managers are now measured against higher risk benchmarks. Carlos, tell us a little bit about what we're doing and what we stopped doing in pursuit of this absolute thing.
So let's go to page number 10. And I think that I would make one additional comment from the previous slide. And I think that Stu already mentioned it, but it's the issue of scale. And I think that as we're concentrating the book, what we are reaching with several managers is scale. And that scale bring advantages to us. And those advantages are twofold. First of all, we get improved transparency. We get improved communication from those managers, and we access limited capacity. And I think that's key, because when we're looking at other types of investments, when you look at private equity, you have fund 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When you are in hedge funds, you have one commingled product, and that product reaches their capacity limits, and you have to look for option B. And that typically you don't want to do that, because you want option A, you want the best. So when we reach certain scale, these managers have the incentive to work with you and provide capacity. So that's key to what we're trying to do here. Now back to page number 10. This is just a depiction of all the strategies that are available to hedge funds. And when we started transforming our program, what we focus on, as Stu previously said, was that we're trying to strip directionality. We're trying to strip beta exposures from this particular program. And by that, what we accomplish is that we enhance the downside protection of it. So if you look at the left-hand side, you looked at several crossover strategies like directional long-short, equity specialists, event-driven, directional credit, stress, distress, private credit. All these type of strategies have a better place in other parts of our endowment. That's why we have a new asset allocation to private credit, and we have moved a lot of these directional hedge funds into the public space. Now, what do we end up with? We end up with several strategies that are more what we call stable value, that are more protective of the endowment, like multi-strategy, macro, commodities, relative value. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But bottom line here is that what we're trying to do is create an absolute return program for PSF.
So let's just take a quick look at what that means. It means multi-strat, market neutral. Our market neutral is not super high leverage. You know, again, we're focused on strategies where our expectation is they can hold their own in bad markets. So we own a lot of directional risk here in the S&P and other areas. We don't need to add to it in our absolute return portfolio. You will note on this, while almost all of it is stable value with reduced drawdown risk, there's a couple tails here that are still in redemption in credit and in directional equity, and I just point those out at 7%, 3%. Those will be coming out there in redemption. We're also focused on liquidity in the book. 50% of the book is available within 1 year and 70% in 2 years. So more liquid, less directional. Really, what hedge fund absolute return was meant to be. That is how we're using it, and we're working with some of the best managers in the business. And this is the result. Over 10 years, $600 million of excess returns against appropriate benchmarks, right? Hedge fund benchmarks, which have included hedge funds that have directional exposure, you know, ones that can really run hard. We are now measured against a more conservative benchmark in the last year, and the team put up a 15.8% return against an 8% benchmark, nearly 8% excess returns. Again, driving a hard deal on risk. And this is where we're focused and continue this line of adding significant excess returns year over year. We would expect this program to grow over time, both in the use of hedge fund managers for directional and importantly in the absolute return space for this kind of return profile. If you look at the top line, 15.8 over 1 year, 8% over 3 years, 8% over 5 years. Those numbers are consistent with what we're trying to do on the whole, taking some significant directional risks. So we like this part of the book. The team has done a great job. We have more evolution to accomplish, but both public equity and absolute return have really added loads of value to this effort, and we'll continue to evolve and keep you updated. And with that, we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, big thing is that it's not correlated. You know, and that's the whole point is that when things are kind of going south, because it's not correlated, it gives you some. That's right. Okay, any questions?
It's not a question, it's just a comment on how hard this task is right now, because this Mag 7 issue is just confounding everybody. It's across every asset class. So, I mean, y'all have a hard job to figure it out.
And this goes to the need for us to spend time together. You know, we talk about, we go back to our values, you know, transparency and challenging each other and developing new skills. The team is really the board, along with all of us. We need to work together to understand all these challenges, and that gets back to the benchmark. We have a board-approved benchmark with S&P 500. We do think it's time to start fading that a little bit. We started doing it in public equities. We started building an absolute return portfolio. One of the worst things that can happen to our effort here is drawdowns, like 09 and 10, right? We do have to take risks. We're going to have years when we lose money. Right? But big drawdowns are extremely damaging. And so we go back to what kinds of things can we do to avoid those? And how can we be prudent about risk? You know, how much risk should we have in NVIDIA and those 7 names, or ex-Tesla, because it is a different animal, someone pointed out. And we're thinking about that a lot. And we're thinking about it Because we, 180 years, there's another 180 years to point out the tree. What's the right way to take risk here for that mission? So you see that in both these portfolios, the thought process.
Okay, we've been going nearly 2 hours. So we need to move to executive session. And so we're gonna do that. And so let me just, do this right. At this time, the Board of Directors of the Texas Permanent School Fund Corporation will hold a private consultation in closed session for February 20th, 2021. For this meeting under the following agenda items and section of the Government Code. Item 6, to receive legal counsel regarding governance matters under Government Code Section 551.071 to consult with legal counsel. Membership reconvene in room 755. That is next door.
I know.
Yeah, right next. For the closed session, the meeting will resume upon conclusion of the closed session. The time is now 11:52, and we will reconvene there in about 5 minutes to give everyone a chance to kind of move. And if you need to take a break, do that. All right.
I'm doing it.
Here, let me do it. I can do it.
Okay.
They have to have their cameras on.
Yeah.
Can we communicate to them that they should have their cameras on?
Yes. Will and Aaron and Marisa, we need the cameras on.
Is that when we're voting?
Just
In order
participating.
to be present, you need to have your camera on.
In order to be considered present, apparently for under public meetings.
Where? Okay, I think we're all in. The closed session of the Board of Directors of the Texas Permanent School Fund Corporation, February 20th, 2025 is now ended. The board is now in open session. The time is 2:08. No action was taken by the board in closed session. All right. We have a few items left on our agenda, and we're going to take up the action items before we take up the discussion items. And so, we're going to go back to item 1. And item 1 is the election of officers pursuant to our bylaws and pursuant to the code. The board is to elect officers in this first meeting. And so at this time, pursuant to the provisions of the bylaws, the first item of business will be to elect a board chair. And therefore the chair opens the nominations for chair of the board.
I will nominate Mr. Tom Maynard as chair of the PSF Corporation.
Tom Maynard has been nominated.
Would like to nominate Cliff Thomas.
Cliff Thomas.
Yes.
Are there any other nominations? Okay. Your motion to close nominations.
Move.
Okay. Second. Okay. Motion and a second. Any objections? Okay. Nominations are closed. We will vote on the nominees on the order in which they were nominated. Okay. Those supporting Tom Maynard for chair of the board, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I have 5. Okay. Those supporting Cliff Thomas, please raise your hand. 1, 2, Three.
You didn't vote.
I haven't voted, that's right, that's right. There being a majority, for Tom Maynard. Tom Maynard is elected chair. The chair will now open nominations for vice chair of the board. Are there nominations?
Mr. Chairman.
Nominate Brad Wright.
Brad Wright has been nominated. Okay. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Is there a motion to close nominations?
So moved.
A motion to close nominations, second.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to close nominations. Any objections? Hear no objections, nominations are closed. Shall we then, by general consent, being that there's one nomination, elect Brad Wright as vice chair of the board? Hear no objections, Brad Wright is elected. Congratulations. All right. Our last one is for board secretary. Are there any nominations for board secretary? The chair opens nominations for board secretary.
Do we have a current secretary?
Aaron.
Oh, Aaron. I nominate Mr. Aaron Kinsey.
Okay. Aaron Kinsey has been nominated. Okay. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close nominations? Motion to close nominations, is there a second? Second. There being no objection to closing nomination, there is none. Nominations are closed. There being one nominee, shall we then, by general consent, elect Aaron Kinsey as secretary of the board? There are no objections. Aaron Kinsey is elected. Congratulations. You can give your acceptance speech the next time we see you, sir. All right, we will now move on to committee report. Mr. Kinsey, you want to go? I'm going to go ahead and start with you, being that you are trying to get you before you go through security. Committee report.
Yeah, thank you. So the Committee of Strategic Planning Policy met yesterday at 3 p.m. All members were present. No action was taken, of course, by the committee. We start with CEO remarks from Bob, very similar to today's presentation, but more in depth. We talked about the strategic plan update. We went into all the goals, talked about the success in the 2024 ones and the path forward on 2025 and beyond. Discussed the management system that's been used for the strategic plan. They've done a lot of work, staff has, on developing that, so congratulations. It sounds like it does a lot for transparency across the organization, helping everybody buy into the success of the organization and where we're going. We also did the ethics policy first reading. That also is running through Dr. Ellis's committee. This policy and the board governance manual policy we had a first reading of. Those both are posted on diligence for all board members to review. This was the first reading. There's going to be significant updates to those between now and the next meeting that we have as a board in May. So I encourage everybody to read those. Please submit any comments to staff so that we can come back in May with a more fulsome discussion on approving those policies. Finally, we closed out the meeting with a discussion about China, the governor's letter regarding China, his executive order, our compliance with that, which we are compliant with that. And then we also talked about pending legislation around China investments and our plan in order to make sure we're compliant and track it in the event that that becomes law, and the process by which we're going to track that through the legislative discussion. With that being said, that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. They did work on that, and a lot of good work on this last year. Okay, Mr. Wright.
The Budget Compensation Committee met yesterday at 10 a.m. All members were present, including new member Hickman. We heard a update from Bob regarding the current budget request that is going through the legislative process. It was presented to Senate Finance on February 10th. It'll be presented next Monday to House Appropriations Committee, and we'll continue to go through that process. The State Auditor's Office finished their audit of last year's incentive plan, the audit was clean. And otherwise, on the legislative side, we are continuing with the budget, tracking other legislation similar to what Aaron already covered. And then we went through the strategic plan as it relates to budget and compensation issues, which the strategic plan is sort of the foundation of that process. And then on evaluation specifically, we are going to adopt a CEO performance evaluation policy that will be specific to the CEO and will require or will solicit input from the board and then ultimately go through the committee.
We got a lot of good work there too. Thank you for that, Brad. Dr. Ellis.
Yeah, we had a busy full meeting yesterday. I'll hit the highlights of it. We began with a report from our external auditors, KPMG, for the year ending August 31st, 2024. We received an unmodified report, which of course is a clean report. So they presented their audit findings and their conclusions, and those are all in our diligent board book. We also discussed the time frame and the process for the year end of 2025. Next, we received remarks from our Chief Audit Officer, and he provided a summary of the completed and ongoing audits, including incentive compensation, bond guarantee program certification, charge card rebate, as well as others. Received the annual cybersecurity report. They discussed risk to the corporation covered, as well as the mitigation steps, the review of the 2024 penetration tests, that 100% of employees have completed cybersecurity training, and 2024 achievements, including what most corporations don't have, which is a zero trust model, security awareness training and phishing simulations established, and a crime insurance policy selected, and then discussed what the plan for 2025 moving forward would be. Next item was the annual compliance report. There was a 100% response rate for the calendar year for all reports sent out. And last, as Chairman Kinsey mentioned, we do have ethics policy first reading. It's running through both of our committees. We discussed that during this transition, it became necessary to revise our ethics policy, and we talked through that. Talked about the transition of the other entities that we reviewed, their ethics policy, UTEMCO, TRS, ERS. As he mentioned, this is first reading, and anything that we want to add to the ethics policy, please submit those between now and our next meeting, and those can be considered at that time.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Man, a lot of good work on the committees, a lot of heavy lifting there over the last 24 months, and moving forward, we continue to polish and burnish this stuff, and I remember that was a long meeting, and we'll see if we can get a little more succinct. The last thing we want to do is we're going to, I called every one of you to talk about committees. And so here's committee assignments for 25 to 27. Brad Wright will remain at budget and compensation. Jim Stanislaus has very graciously agreed to go over there. We really value his, particularly in that compensation area. So he's going to be able to join in me and Brad over there. Dr. Ellis is going to remain with audit ethics with Cliff Thomas and Will Hickman. Aaron Kinsey will remain with policy and strategic planning, along with Commissioner Buckingham and Marisa Perez-Diaz. And I believe we have reached the end of our agenda. And if there's no further business, thank you. I believe we are scheduled for May 21st and 22nd. Same bad time and same bad station. And with that, we will stand adjourned. Everything will be here.